morning, good afternoon, or good night, depending on what part of the world you're visiting us. My name is Daniel Marcos from the Growth Institute, and today we're going to have an awesome presentation. And we're going to learn from Salim how to really become an exponential organizations and really be able to be 10 times more impactful with your company, with your project, and with less cash. Really, really important how to be efficient in this world. And hey, Salim, I would love to hear your learnings and findings rewriting the book with Peter Diamandis. I saw the community and all the comments. It was awesome. You crowdsourced the second edition of the book. So look forward to hearing from you and all the updates on the new model.
All right. Great to be here and welcome everybody. The world has changed pretty fundamentally because of the pandemic. We think of the coronavirus pandemic as a singularity, right? Every model by which we predicted the world basically broke, and we have to reinvent new models and new measurables for the world going forward. You've heard about my background. I think if you've read the book, you understand it. I was born in India. I grew up there till I was 10, emigrated to Canada. I've now lived in 8 countries for more than a year each, so I'm very confused. And 10 years in Europe, the last 20 years here in the US. The most notable point is probably Yahoo, where I was the head of innovation, and recognize that when you try anything disruptive in a big company, the immune system attacks you. Because all of our organizations are designed for predictability and designed for efficiency. We're trying to deliver the same product and in the same service quality in 100 locations using standardized operating processes. If you try and do anything radically different, it either gets diluted heavily or it gets spit out. One of those two responses. And I was struck by the fact that the more disruptive an idea we came up with in Brickhouse, which was Yahoo's incubator, the less the company could handle it. And that has led me to a series of journeys. The book talks about that, but we're now focused completely on that. We have an ecosystem now that Daniel is a key member of over 17,000 consultants and entrepreneurs and innovators applying this model in 130 countries. Okay, really, this is the starting point, and hopefully most people have a good sense of this now, so I won't spend time on this. The world is operating on an exponential basis driven by computation. Ray Kurzweil first noticed that the power of Moore's law, the doubling pattern in 18 months, has been happening for over 100 years. And most importantly, it turns out that once you have a doubling pattern and an information-based technology, that it doesn't stop doubling. And this is cognitively very hard for us to understand. It led Peter to write this book, Abundance, charting out that if we can actually harness this acceleration, we'll soon have an abundance of healthcare, education, clean water, energy, etc. I'm now on Peter's board at XPRIZE, which has some interesting characters on it. I joke that every board meeting starts with, what did Elon just do? And then we move on to the rest of the business of the day. And we've been, you may have seen the $100 million carbon removal XPRIZE for removing carbon out of the atmosphere at scale. This was funded by Elon Musk. It's the largest public prize in human history. And I think it reflects the importance of that model. The challenge that we have when we have exponential growth is that we don't see it. Cognitively, all of our education, training, intuition about the world is linear. If you're trying to chart out your business, you typically look at your past performance, you draw a line. Where will this be, right? And yet the world is operating on a very different basis. And we saw that very clearly with the coronavirus, as the world leaders that were thinking linearly did very badly, and the ones that understood that this was an exponential problem. And the problem we have globally, actually, is that you cannot address an exponential problem with a linear solution. Okay, it doesn't work. And you have to have scalable, decentralized environments to navigate exponential problems. And most of the big challenges we face today, climate change, pandemics, whatever, are exponential in nature. From a technology perspective, we now have a dozen technologies operating on this doubling pattern. This is completely unique in human history. In the past, maybe one technology was accelerating or another. We've never had this many operate at the same time. And if you take all the aggregate effects of all of these breakthroughs, we see 4 major dynamics occurring. I won't touch on the first one. We're digitizing everything around us. Our memories aren't in our heads, they're in our smartphones. All our relationships are now digital. because of social media as opposed to analog. We're slapping sensors onto anything that moves and tracking the data streams. AI is used heavily to make sense of all of that tsunami of information. But it turns out when you digitize, things become very, very disruptive. And the favorite analogy we have for this is a photography, where when you, for those of you who are old enough to remember film photography, you're operating on a scarcity model and a physical substrate. A physical chemical image on a film costs about $1 a photograph, takes a few days to get your prints back. When you move to digital photography and you go to the information-based paradigm, these three incredible things happen, right? Marginal cost goes to zero. Now I can take 1,000 photographs and the cost stays the same. Number two, the domain completely explodes. We're now taking billions of times more photographs than we used to. I challenge anybody to take a selfie or photograph of without clicking 6 times at least. And the third thing that happens is very subtle, but very important from a business perspective, is you change the problem space. What I mean by that is the big problem in a scarcity film photography world is, how do I take the best picture? How do I take the best photograph? Because each photograph, each click costs me about $1. So we have very expensive cameras. We offer courses on photography. We publish books on composition. Then you move to digital photography, and the problem that we have in a digital world is not how do I take the best photograph. The problem is I have 8 copies of my photographs on 6 different online services and I can't find anything, right? And you've gone from a sourcing problem to a filtering problem. On top of that, all those business models are in film photography gone. Nobody can make money offering courses on photography today, right? So this is the transition that we're seeing in industry after industry, domain after domain, product after product. We're essentially moving business models from a scarcity model to an abundance model, which is probably the biggest umbrella kind of watershed that we're crossing in the world today. When you apply this to industries, I look at things in kind of 3 layers. The vast majority of our history is at the bottom. All of the value, revenue generation, business models come from the sheer physicality of the world. You extract resources, we assemble raw materials, we ship things around, and almost all the money sits there. Then we added products like the Kindle or the iPhone, where the product is physical, but all the revenue is digitally driven. And with the rise of mobile and internet, we have now complete industries that are digital and have no physical manifestation, the news, financial information, et cetera, et cetera. And the world used to look like this, but now more and more it looks like this, right? Domain after domain, industry after industry is moving to an information-based digital environment. Music is now digital, news is digital, books are digital, cars are now more software than hardware, et cetera. And this is happening at the most incredible basis because each of these technologies is doubling on its own pattern. For example, drones are doubling every 9 months in their price performance. In neuroscience, the resolution at which we can image the human brain is doubling about every year. And each of them is incredible, but when you intersect them, that adds a whole other multiplier to the equation. So you take cryptography, which is accelerating in its own way, and you take computation, you cross them together, and boom, we have blockchain and cryptocurrencies, right? I'll touch on one. I want to just ask a question that I'd like you to put in the chat. Who do you think are the top 2 countries that are exporting food? Who are the top 2 food exporting countries? If anybody has an idea, stick it in the chat because I want to ask a quick question. Okay, who are the top 2 countries? So we're seeing Russia, China, Poland, USA, et cetera, Netherlands, and so on. Okay, some great commentary there. What's happening in agriculture is we're moving to vertical farming and hydroponics and aeroponics, and we are now at the threshold where we can do most of our agriculture vertically rather than horizontally. Okay, in the best calculation we've seen is if you took 35 skyscrapers in Manhattan, turned them into vertical farms, just that would feed the entire city sustainably. Okay, so you don't need millions of square miles of horizontal farming, you just need a few buildings doing vertical farming and off you go. The answer to the question, the US is the number, there's lots of food producers that are big, China, India, Russia, US because they're big, but the biggest exporter, number 1 is the US, number 2 is Holland. The second biggest food exporting country in the world is Holland, which is like this big. Because they do vertical farming, greenhousing. They're the largest producer of tomatoes in the world. I'll suggest to you that if they can be that, then any other country can do anything they want, right? So there's some profound things to happen there. This is our old way of doing vertical farming. This is obviously very difficult, and we should avoid this if at all possible. Here's a farm out of Australia that is using solar energy to desalinate seawater and then using that fresh water. They make 17,000 tons of tomatoes per year at zero cost of production. Okay, so pretty incredible to be able to do this. I tried to live this myself. You may have seen me talk about this. I took a Tesla and I drove from Miami up to Toronto. At the time, the car drove itself about 35% of the time. And then 18 months later, I drove the car back. I was slightly more clever on the trip back. It was a bit shorter. But look at the bottom row. The car, when I went up, drove itself 35% of the time. When I drove it back, same car, same sensors as driving itself 80% of the time, right? That's kind of incredible. There's Moore's law in live action, okay? And this is kind of an incredible commentary that I get into this car, which is basically a first-class train cabin. It carries me across the country 80% of the time by itself. And because the charging stations are free for my model of the car, the entire trip of 2,500 kilometers cost me zero. It was free. Okay? And I call that a Gutenberg moment. I basically frame that as something fundamental has shifted. And I framed it basically that we have 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. The printing press in the 15th century changed the world, but solar energy changes the world, blockchain changes the world, AI changes the world. So we have about 20 of those hitting us at the same time. Now, the challenge we have, and a lot of the problems that you see in the world are because of this framing from E.O. Wilson, who said that, you know, our technology is godlike, our institutions are medieval, and our emotions are basically lizard-like and dinosaur Paleolithic-like. And we have to figure out how to reconcile those three layers. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a hell of a mess. And you see that mess in the US today or in various places around the world where we can't reconcile the possibilities of technology with the old ways of thinking about the brain. When we look around the world, there's not a single institution by which we run the world that will navigate this transition. We have to reinvent all the institutions and mechanisms and constructs by which we run the world. Just education, for example, takes a young child, trains them through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Well, we have no idea what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them, right? And so there's this incredible tension now where our institutions, journalism is broken, education is broken, etc. Okay, from an economic perspective, it gets even more nuts because when we built the monetary systems that we were building, we didn't realize that technology was deflationary. We didn't realize that technology would cost less. Throughout history, advanced technologies will always cost more. And now, because of that, it's breaking the monetary system, okay? You see the incredible drop in price in technology here. What this means is that for the first time in human history, advanced technologies are very cheap. In the history of humanity, advanced technology was very expensive. The blockchain is open source and free. Solar panels are very cheap. Sensors are very cheap. It means anybody now has access to disruptive innovation. And that's a really important point. If I can kind of give you one key point to think about when you leave, anybody in the world has access to disruptive innovation today and can build new products and services, right? The space shuttle cost $600 million per space shuttle launch. SpaceX brought it down to $60 million with its reusable rockets. And this company, Relativity Space, is 3D printing the rockets, and they'll be able to drop it to $6 million. So there you've seen 100 times drop in the cost of a domain in about 20 or 25 years. Okay, it's unbelievable what's happening, and this is happening across the board. At the industry level, when we digitize, we see this huge deflationary cliff in the newspaper business and the music business, etc. This will hit the car business. I'd urge you to go read this book called The Price of Tomorrow, written by Jeff Booth, who I think of as the chief economist of the abundance era. He basically posited that these our monetary systems will break because they didn't realize technology was deflationary. And he suggested that either cryptocurrencies or a black swan event like a pandemic would burst that bubble. One of the comments that I've heard him make that's incredibly profound is that Bitcoin gives you money velocity without debt. And the central observation he made in this book was that over the last 40 years globally, every dollar increase in GDP has come with $4 increase of debt. So we're basically growing the global economy with debt. And it's not that you can write off that debt, you have to pay it back, it's structural. And therefore, we're essentially just taxing the future generations. And at some point, that has to come back to haunt us, which is any minute now type of thing. So there's an incredible way of thinking about this that's very important. The challenge, and the reason I talk about all this, is that this is all impacts of exponential growth. Our ability to see this is very bad. You'll see this every 2 years. You'll see this article come out in the news saying Moore's law will be dead. Okay, and we never see it happening. Okay, when the Google car first came out, the cost of the LiDAR unit in 2010 was about $150,000. By 2012, it was $75,000, and all the car companies ignored it because that's just too expensive. And now we're down to about $10 for that unit. I'll give you a little thought experiment. Go back to the car industry in your mind 10 years ago and tell them that this thing that costs $100,000 will basically be free by the end of the decade, and watch the immune system. You'll be given a white coat and some medicine and be asked to stand in the corner while they do the important work because you've clearly lost your mind. And yet here we are, right? And this is my favorite graph. You may have seen this work by Hoekstra out of Holland. He tracked the predictions from the International Energy Agency. These are the top energy experts in the world predicting the future of solar energy. The black is the actual growth of solar energy, and the predictions of the top energy experts are year by year go linear, okay? And this, we can give you 100 examples of this in different industries, but the key is that the experts in an existing industry or an existing company cannot see disruptive growth. They always think it's got to level off and they think it's going to stop, okay? Solar energy is dropping in price 50% every 2 years. How do you think it goes down? Why do you think it won't continue like this? And this is the year after year after year, they don't learn. And this is really an important point. Okay, reason this is all unstoppable is the final piece of this, that all of these domains, all of these technologies go through this pattern where a domain becomes digital, the cost drop to zero, you get open source communities forming, and then you get radical disruption of the status quo. Elon is probably the best example of this. No experience in the car industry, energy industry, space industry, and yet he had created market leaders in all of them. His methodology is incredibly simple. He looks at a technology that's growing exponentially, whether it's battery, solar, space technologies, whatever, neural links. Look at where it will be in 10 years. Where will that technology be on a 10-year doubling pattern? And then let's build a company to intercept that curve. That's it. That's how he operates, right? And he just stamps this out. No experience in any of these, he's able to do this. And to make sure you're clear, this is not a Silicon Valley phenomenon. Now, this is a fishing village in Vietnam where once a month a big ship would come to deliver diesel fuel for their fishing boats. At some point, the ship stopped coming. They literally had no fuel for their fishing boats. They bought a solar panel, connected it to the propeller, looked it up on the internet, how to do this, and have invented a solar-powered boat. Okay, so here you have cutting-edge innovation using disruptive technologies happening at the edge of the world. This is incredibly exciting because when these folks get their hand on drones and CRISPR and blockchain, things will get very interesting indeed. This is the third fastest performing car in the world, 900 horsepower. Look at it, it's like quite a beautiful car. This is being designed, engineered, and built in Sri Lanka. Okay, that hotbed of automotive innovation. I love showing this to German car executives because their minds break that somebody could do this on an island of fishermen. And I'll suggest to you, if somebody can do this there, anybody can do anything anywhere. And it really speaks to the idea that disruptive innovation will now come from anywhere and everywhere. Vitalik Buterin was 18 years old in Toronto, middle-class kid, ignores his professors, and boom, we have a $250 billion ecosystem. I'll suggest to you that any banker, in fact, most of us, cannot conceive of the idea that him and 7 others put together a $250 billion ecosystem out of nothing. Okay, it's just not conceivable to us. So this is the key point. Now we have NFTs and the metaverse and all sorts of things coming along. So you get the disruption. Okay, and by the way, we'll share these slides with you if you want. I'm seeing Judith's question there. Okay, so how do you deal with this? So let me touch on this. This quote from David Rose is the thing that's been stuck in my head, that all of our organizations are actually designed for the 20th century. They're not designed for the 21st century. And in the 20th century, when things moved fairly slowly, you could be focused on efficiency and predictability. Now you need to focus on adaptability, agility, flexibility, speed, and your organization structure has to be architected for that. I'll give you this other quote from Jack Welch. This was from his 2000 GE annual report. He said, if the metabolism of the outside world is faster than your inside, and then inside your company, you're dead. The only question is when. Okay, I'll suggest to you that the metabolism of almost any company in the world, certainly big companies, is slower than the outside world. And so how do you interface with that outside world is a critical path. So we used to do these sessions at Singularity where we bring in C-suites of big companies. We asked them beforehand, how aware are you of these breakthroughs? And 75% had no awareness. When we asked them at the end, how big of an impact will this have on your industry? Look at the outcome. Right? 80% said they'd have game-changing impact within 2 years. And they all had urgent action items. Okay, so this is the gap that we need to bridge with education and programs like this. More important, though, in terms of then the fact that the world is changing, is what do you do about it? And the book really came out of the question that we would get at Singularity. People would go through a week of understanding the depth of the disruption, and they would ask a question: what the hell do I do on Monday? When I get back to the office, what do I do? And this is essentially the answer. We noticed that there's a new breed of organization where we're growing the organization 10 times better, faster, cheaper than its competitors in the same space. So one definition we have for EXOs is that you're radically outperforming by 10x. The newer version that's coming out in the second edition of the book is that the internet allowed us to radically drop the cost of, when you're building a business, you worry about demand and supply, right? And hopefully your cost of demand is less than your cost of supply. Well, the internet allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially. Every Silicon Valley company is trying for a viral loop, in which case their cost of acquisitions go to zero. EXOs have figured out how to drop the cost of supply exponentially. If you think about the cost of Airbnb, adding a room to their inventory is near zero. If you're Hyatt, you have to build a hotel, right? Same with Waze, same with et cetera. And so radically, we're now EXOs can drop the cost of supply, and that's a second definition of a thing. A couple of examples are a poster child example of an EXO is TED. It was a nice conference, 1,000 people a year going to Monterey in California. Chris Anderson takes it over, does 3 things: establishes a massive transformative purpose, ideas worth spreading. Then he puts all the TED Talks on YouTube for free, leveraging rich media. Then he allows anybody to go create a TEDx event, and boom, he has a global media brand, right? This is another example more recently. This is Guazi, a Chinese car company that allows you, sells used cars. Now, if you think about how you disrupt the used car business, it's not obvious. It's a physical thing. You have to figure out how to sell it. Maybe you do better a warranty, maybe you have an app, which is what's happening in the US, etc. These guys show up at a car, they take 250 data points, photos, videos, they take an audio of the engine, run it through a machine learning algorithm to check for perturbations in the noise of the engine, and they can check engine quality. They come up with a real-time price. They show that price to the seller and say, we'll give you 10% less than that price in cash right now. When somebody wants to buy the car, they'll show them the price of the car determined by their algorithm, and they'll say, we'll sell it to you for 10% more. That's it. In 7 years, they've captured 80% of the used car market in China. Okay, I'm just going to repeat this. Out of nothing, this company has captured 80% of the used car market in China in 7 years. They sell 2 million cars a month. Okay, and just by a new model and applying some of these EXO techniques. So what does it mean to be an EXO? There are 3 pieces that are critical. Number one, you have to have what we call a massive transformative purpose. What is the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve? Is it curing cancer? Is it organizing the world's information? Uber is everybody should have a private driver, etc. It's the North Star. It answers the Simon Sinek question as to why do you exist. Then there's 5 externalities that you can leverage to keep a very small feature footprint and scale very fast. Uber doesn't hire its own staff. TED uses community. Google uses algorithms. Airbnb is leveraging other people's assets. And then you have decentralized gamification models, incentive prizes, now crypto economics. If you look at the rise of all the blockchains in the world, basically they've taken community and added crypto economics. And boom, they have multi-billion-dollar blockchains just from that, right? So incredible opportunities there. The reason I have a picture of an airline here is that we, in our ecosystem, somebody worked with one of the major airlines in the world, took all the data and turned it into a separate asset, okay? And where we are now is 2 years later, as they've been doing this, the airline is worth a few $1 billion. The data subsidiaries are worth $30 billion. It turns out we can turn any company and find what the data assets are and multiply the value of the company by about 5x just from doing that. Okay, so keep that in your head as you think about the world. The second set of attributes are the internal attributes. How do you manage the control framework and drive culture? And so you have interfaces with all those externalities like Uber has a specific interface with its drivers, or Apple with its App Store developers. There's real-time dashboards and lean startup metrics, etc. Experimentation is the whole lean startup movement. Autonomy is decentralized org structures leading to DAOs. And then you have social technology, Slack, Yammer, Chatter that allow good horizontal peer-to-peer communication in companies. If you're doing a startup, you should be doing all of these, okay? Because if you're not, somebody else will. If you have an existing company, we found that if you apply 4 of these, you get a 10x performance improvement in your company. And a great question is, what 4 are the best? This is GitHub, the highest rated EXO we ever saw. They use all of these attributes. Microsoft bought them for $7.5 billion. I remember talking to the accounting partner that managed the acquisition, and he was going bananas. He's like, there's no assets, there's no workforce, there's no intellectual property. What the hell do I put on the balance sheet? They literally tried to block the acquisition because they didn't know what to put on the balance sheet. And Satya Nadella said, just buy the goddamn thing. We need access to the 30 million developers that use it, right? And super smart purchase. Now you have all these crypto projects like NFTs. Most of these NFT projects are EXOs. They have a massive purpose, etc. The Bored Ape Yacht Club. This is my Bored Ape. I needed to play in this. This is now a $3 billion market cap out of nothing in like a year. Okay, this is kind of crazy. Okay, I want to show you the data on how this applies to big companies. So when we launched the book, I did a segment on CNBC Squawk Box, and we ranked the Fortune 100 on the EXO model. So this is the Fortune 100 ranked by their EXO score. We have a survey where you can score your own company. So this is the Fortune 100 ranked by this. We then tracked over 7 years which of the companies that used the EXO model the most and which used it the least. Okay, Chandra Nagpal was one of our community members that did this, spent time working with UBS and other companies. Here's the outcome. In the Fortune 100, which is the 100 biggest companies in the US, the top 10 most EXO-friendly outperform the bottom 10, meaning the most agile and flexible outperform the least agile and least flexible, 3 times better revenue growth, way better profitability, 11 times return on assets. But look at that bottom row, shareholder returns, 40x higher if you're an EXO company than if you're not an EXO company, okay? And I was so floored by this. I said, Chandra, this can't be right. And he'd even done an R-squared analysis to make sure this was statistically valid. We can now beat every CEO on the head with this, basically saying, and the umbrella thesis is really simple. If your company is not architected for agility, flexibility, adaptability, speed, it doesn't matter what your strategy is, you won't be able to apply it, okay? All right, you can take go check it out. Here's our advice to big companies. Number 1, update your leadership. Which is why programs like this are so important that Alex and Daniel have put together. You need to update your people that this is a new world. But most importantly, do not do disruptive change at the edge. At the core, do disruptive change at the edge. Apple is the biggest company in the world. Their model is really simple. They'll take a small team that's very disruptive, put the team at the edge of the company, keep them secret and stealth, and they'll say to them, go disrupt another industry, right? There's no limit to their market cap. That's all they do. They have 18 or 20 teams at any time looking at different domains, watches, retail, cars, payment. And when there's something works, they just fold it back into the ecosystem. What we suggest to companies is reshape yourself to be able to spin off these EXOs off the edge. And ideally, the EXO becomes bigger than the mothership. Okay. There's a great precedent for this. Lojas Americanas is the largest retailer in Brazil. They launched a small e-commerce company, had the discipline to keep it separate, and now the e-commerce company is generating more revenues than the mothership. Okay. In a similar way, Amazon Web Services, which was a small offshoot of Amazon, is now delivering 75% of the profits of Amazon globally. Okay. I'll give you this little analysis of big companies. Marriott Hotels is worth $53 billion today, roughly. If Marriott had launched TripAdvisor, Booking.com, Airbnb, their market cap would be 5 times higher. The reason we use this example is all of those ideas were sitting inside Marriott, but the immune system would not let it out. So for fear of cannibalizing the existing revenue stream, they're leaving 5x market cap on the table. So we are now working with companies to help unlock this. We've come up with, this is what we call the immune system. These are some of the responses you'll see from your teams and from your people. If you say, hey, let's try something disruptive, you'll get one of these 50 things, right? Lots of easy ways of saying no. If you can do it, you can do something really radical. We've come up with a 10-week program that you learn about in the course called an ExO Sprint, which hacks the immune system. We found we can transform culture at scale. We're able now to move leadership, culture, and management thinking 3 years ahead in 10 weeks using this model. We've done it 60 times with Black & Decker, HP, Visa, you name it. Our clients are reporting an average 70 times return on investment from running this process. We can now go to, between that and the data idea, et cetera, we can go to any company and say, let's help you grow 10 times bigger. We have a clear roadmap, and you'll learn about that roadmap in this course. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I'm going to just leave you with this one last example. We launched this prize a few years ago at X Prize for extracting clean water out of the atmosphere. And the prize was, can you create a machine that will extract 2,000 liters of water a day out of the atmosphere using only renewable energy at a cost of less than 2 cents a liter. And 2,000 liters is enough for a village or a large apartment building. A team popped up 3 years into it. We awarded the prize. We now have the prototype of a machine that can solve clean water anywhere in the world. Right, so this is what happens when a small team applies itself in radical ways. All right, let me pause there. I've gone a little bit over time. Daniel, apologies, but
awesome, perfect.
Q&A.
Exactly what we needed. So first, on 10 years after implementing the methodology, or 9-10 years,
yeah,
what's been the biggest aha moment for you, and what happens with the company?
I'm floored by 2 or 3 things. So Peter and I are writing the 2nd edition of the book. Along with our community, we crowdsourced a lot of the content from the community, and then we're assembling it together, which is actually hell. Each community member has lots to say, so we've got like 1 million things to filter through. What do you put in? It's like a movie where you tape 450 hours and only 90 minutes goes into the final movie. We're in that hell of chopping it down right now. The couple of things we've learned. One, the model is incredibly resilient. We thought about, do we change the model? And it turns out we can't figure out a clean way of changing the model. So that's number one. The second is the data is now unbelievably clear that if by the end of this decade, if you're not an EXO structured company, you just won't succeed, because it just turns out to be as the comet of information is hit. It's like the big comet that took out the dinosaurs. Our big companies around the world are like dinosaurs. Now there's a breed of furry little animals, and it turns out the EXO model is the most dominant species of that furry animal breeds coming out.
Awesome. I remember when I took the executive program at Singularity, the 3rd night, we were having some drinks at dinner, and I came to you and I was completely overwhelmed. I saw the technology, how fast the world was changing. And I came to you and said, like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And you said exactly that's why precisely I'm writing the book.
Yeah.
To give kind of the roadmap.
That and alcohol or psychedelics is what you need now to get your head around what's happening in the world.
But so when you wrote the book and now that you have implemented and kind of helped these 11 attributes, have you seen the attributes have that impact in the company? You said, hey, when they implemented this attribute, this is what happened, or this is why it was important they implement the attribute. What have you seen? What are the 2-3 things that you said it was game changer for this company?
So it depends on the type of company. If you're running an oil rig, you're probably not crowdsourcing, right? So community is not that relevant to you. But AI, machine learning, data analytics is super incredibly important, okay? So it depends on the type of company, but in general, what we found is most companies can create unbelievable value by creating a community around themselves. That's really, really, really critical, okay? Number two, it turns out that the more of the attributes you use, the more value you create because each one adds to each other, right? The data analytics can be used by the community, that can be used into dashboards, et cetera, et cetera. So we found the second part. There's some key interdependencies that we've learned over the years. For example, you can't do lean startup without having an MTP. Right? If you want to have people running lots of experiments, great, but you have to have an umbrella vision as to what. This is where GE failed. GE implemented lean. 60,000 executives got trained in lean startup thinking, and it failed. The biggest corporate training exercise in the history of business, and it failed because they didn't have a guiding MTP to guide them. This is also why BlackBerry failed. BlackBerry got super successful, did not have an MTP to carry it through the next level. Google, Apple, et cetera, are all successful around that. What we're finding with companies is you start off as an operating company, you move to becoming a platform, and then you move to becoming an ecosystem. Facebook, Apple, Google are all turning into ecosystems as we speak.
Right. Now let's talk about drama. Let's talk about the immune system.
Yeah.
And we've seen when we try to implement the ExO Sprint and we'll start implementing all this pushback. So tell us about the immune system, why it's important for companies to have it, and how the ExO model breaks it. Because change management is the hardest thing that we're seeing.
And I'm a former management consultant, right? And you always run up against change management as it's the holy grail of problems in the management consulting world. And what we're excited about with the Sprint is we have now a clear methodology that breaks the immune system. The fundamental reality and problem and challenge is that, you know, all our late night discussions on the meaning of life and the human condition, people would fundamentally much rather be comfortable than happy. Okay. And so people like, if they're used to doing something in one way, they don't want to change. And that's totally understandable. What you need to do is you need to create a case for that change and then allow people to do it. And we found a way of doing that. And I can describe the Sprint if you want in a minute. So what we do is we do an opening workshop with senior management. We'll take the top 10% of senior management, do a singularity style workshop to freak them out.
And that's the awake. And by the way,
that's called the awake session.
It's worth $50,000. Just that.
And you want to freak them out, and then you want to leave them alone because they're useless for the future anyway. Okay, because they're all. If you're, I don't mean this in a bad way, but if you're running BMW supply chain for 20 years, you're not useful to the car industry in the future as we move to electric cars. Right? You're talking about how do you source pistons and how do you source this, and the car world is totally different. So it's in fact not just not useful, it's actually a counter measure. It's like an anti-problem. So that's one issue. So you freak out the existing incumbents. Then what we've done is we've worked with senior management to pick 25 young leaders and future lieutenants of the business. They divide into 4 teams of 6 people each. 2 teams are sitting at the edge of the company saying, what would I do to blow this open? Nestle spinning off Nespresso is a great analog of doing something incredible at the edge and creating billions of dollars of value. And 2 teams are looking at what would I do to, what EXO attributes would I apply to the core thinking to in the core organization. And they do their work. And when those 25 people go back to their day jobs, they infect everybody else. And because you freaked out the incumbents, they don't attack the new ideas. And that's part of the reason the Sprint works. Now we've done it 60 times with big companies. We've got it down to a pretty a clear process. Our thesis is, now we've also done this in the public sector, by the way. We have a nonprofit in Miami that's run it a bunch of times, most notably with the mayor of Miami. So a lot of the buzz around the city of Miami is partly our fault. We laid all the vocabulary down with public sector a few years ago.
Thank you. I remember we implemented QuarkSoft sprint that we did in Mexico. 2 weeks into the implementation, one of the CEO came to me and said, "What are you doing with my company?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" "They're talking about us and them." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Us, the people that just got awake, and we now see the future, like waking up and seeing something different, and the rest of the 450 to 500 employees that had no idea." And because they went through their way, they started working with the attributes, they got pushed to go and see some world that they were not seeing.
Yeah.
So let's talk, because I think it's brilliant that you brought a Shark Tank environment, let's say, with your employees to bring those ideas. Most of the companies are afraid of what the other company is doing. They have it internally, and you figure out how to engage their own team members to build this. So what happens in this end of session when they present their ideas? Tell us a little bit about that.
What we found is before we do a sprint, if you had a great idea inside of the company, you might get funded 5 or 10% of the time. Okay. After we've run a sprint and people have a great idea inside the company, they're getting funded 95% of the time. Because the cultural shift we're realizing is the company as a company has realized that disruptive change is the future, and we'd better fund those disruptive ideas because that is our future. And that emotional change is what we are able to achieve in the 10 weeks. A cultural shift. Almost every question you ask inside a big company, the answer is no. Hey, I want to do this. No, I want to do this. No, I want to do this. No, I want to do this. No. And what we've done to do is turn it into a culture of yes, and structurally, and from an emotional perspective. I think the best framing of what we're learned how to do is what Tony Robbins or Landmark Education do with individuals, where they use neuro-linguistic programming to create a state change in your subconscious of an individual. We're able to create a state change in the subconscious of a company.
Perfect. And that's why we've implemented EXOs with companies running with scaling up as an example. Once they get their projects approved, now they put it in priorities, they put it in one-page plan. We've used the class with Kaja Griffin. I don't know if you know Kaja. We have strategy classes and ex-McKinsey that helps you dissect all your ideas. And we use that to be able to dissect all the ideas and be able to select which words were the most important and then put them on the one-page plan. Cash flow story, all these other programs that we have. So let me go into showing a little bit of the program. And then, guys, Q&A, please send your questions so you could get Salim directly answering your own questions. So please send your questions. But I will explain a little bit of the class and then how that interrelates with the rest of the programs and the MBD All Access at the Growth Institute. So we have this program that is 8 modules on how to implement an EXO sprint. Everything you learn from Salim, we put it together all inside a 3-month intensive course for you to learn how to do a sprint in your company. You're going to get all the tools, all the learnings directly from Salim and his EXO trainers on how to do this in your company, build in 8 modules on weekly videos. And then you're going to have 12 live interactive sessions, a couple with Salim and the rest with the coaches on how to do it right, what's the right messaging, what's the right mindset of the leadership that you need to have. We're going to bring coaches that have led how to run a sprint in your company so they could be able to answer all your questions and guide you through the process. So this is a call that Kent was leading in the last class and kind of walking executives through the program of how to do this implementation in your company, led by coaches that have experience doing it all over the world. Then we're going to give you tools. Really important. You get the learning from Salim, then you have the conversation with the coaches, but then you need the tools to start implementing your company. And what you have to do in each of the steps, as you see, each tool is 1 step, and you're going to walk you through a process of 12 steps for you to learn how to implement a sprint and then implement a sprint in your company. And then, of course, support of a like-minded community, people all over the world, as you could see from this webinar, very diverse, people all over the world. They come together, they learn together, and they're going to have some conversations with the other members. Hey, what are you doing? How are you going to implement it? What kind of pushback do you got from your team? How are you changing that to be able to implement this methodology correctly and turn your company from linear growth to exponential growth? And this class is part of our MBD All Access. you could take this program and also complement with the rest of the programs. As we said, this class starts September 22nd. Here's the link to the program as we talk about. But as an example, other classes that are part of the community. So this is the class with Salim of Exponential Organizations. But once you get all your ideas and you want to fund 95% of the projects that come out of the sprint, then you need to have a strategy around, hey, we're going to change dramatically the strategy of a company. How we're going to dissect these ideas, how we're going to prioritize them, what goes where. And that's a class on strategy of outing the competition with Kaya Kripendor. Then once you select them, you have to put them on your one-page plan and then align the execution of your team with scaling up. And then we have another class, an example, John Mullins with London Business School, on how to really get your ideas and put a business model that requires less cash, so you could really scale this without having to sell a big piece of your company. So all the programs together, they interact to help you be able to get your ideas selected, but most importantly, execute it after you're able to get it done. So this program, it's cost $2,000 per month for a team of 5. It's really important that you come with your team. You'll learn together, and then they help you implement in your company. So this program is a 3-month program. So you have to come in for the first 3 months. And then if you want to stay and get all the other classes, welcome to stay. But this is the kickoff of getting your company from going from linear to exponential growth. And this is the team package. By the way, the first teams, if you want to try because you were on this webinar, we have a $1,000 discount for the first quarter. So instead of being $6,000 for 5 executives, it would be $5,000 for 5 executives for the first quarter. And then if you want, you could continue with the program. If there's just one executive, it's $700 per month. So it'll be $2,100 to go through a program for the first 3 months. And of course, we take all the risk. We know this program works. Come in, start seeing the video, start having your conversations. You can go up to the 3rd class or 30 days after you enroll to ask for your money back. We've never had a client asking for the money back with this class. It's so amazing that we know it works. We know you're going to be super excited of implementing it. So we take all the risk. So that way you could test and make sure this is for you. All right, so let's go to the Q&A. Alex, can you feed me the questions on WhatsApp? Or, hey guys, put them in the chat. I would love to have some. Okay, here are some. How do you maintain?
I can take a crack at a couple of these.
Please.
Actually, Marius is asking, how do you get it integrated as a regenerative system? That's a business model question. We're familiar with donut economics and circular economics. I've been talking a lot with the conscious capital folks. Raj Sisodia has just written a book called The Healing Organization. And basically what we find is these are totally compatible with the ExO in general, because you may have a regenerative system, but how you actually, the mechanics of how you organize your structure organization, the more you structure it as an ExO, the more naturally regenerative it is, because it's a listening organization constantly adapting to the outside world. Our old companies and org structures are very rigid and structured and hierarchical. ExOs are very adaptable. And that may be the big, and as the external world becomes more volatile, your ability to adapt is going to drive market value, and then allows you to do all these other things. We are now standing on a box that basically says, by the end of this decade, every nonprofit, impact project, government department, for-profit company will basically be structured as an ExO, because it's just better, and we have the data now to prove it. So that's the quick answer there. But it should be very compatible on that sense. Louis, nice to connect again. How can you apply it to medicine, especially hospitals and pharma? Oh God, that's super hard. The reason is that you're in a regulatory environment, and there's a bad immune system in regulatory structures, right? Like the policy and the regulatory is the immune system. And there's a huge opportunity. I think the only way to solve it for hospitals and pharma is to go around the system and do medical tourism. You know, Panama, people are flying to Panama to get stem cell injections because of this, etc. Intuitive Surgical makes medical robots. And I love this story where somebody that was living a mile from the Intuitive Surgical factory in Silicon Valley, flew to Switzerland to get a knee procedure done because the procedure had been approved in Switzerland, but not in the US. So even though he lives a mile from the machine manufacturer, he flies across the world to get the procedure done. I think we're going to see a ton more of that as people start to take their own healthcare, et cetera, into account. There's a million ways you can apply this. For example, hospitals and pharma have been terrible at creating community in any real way around their world, and just that would have a huge answer to that. All right, next, Mateboho, how do you maintain the buzz post an EXO sprint in the big company? Yeah, so this is a great question. One of the big questions I had when we first piloted the sprint with Procter & Gamble was, is this going to be once we leave, they'll go back to the old way? Or will this be a permanent change? And so we watched to see, because we had no idea what would happen. It turns out to be a permanent state change. The company does not go back to its old way. There's one case that we've had one of our biggest failure modes was a Middle Eastern organization that was doing what we call innovation theater. They did the sprint to tick the box to say they were really innovative, but they really weren't intending on applying this. What happened was the 25 young leaders realized that senior management wasn't serious, and they all quit. They all left the company. So all of a sudden they lost their entire next-gen leadership, and they re-ran the sprint so they could recollect it, and then they started applying that. So it turns out that it's a state change, and the former company does not go back to the old way. It turns out to be a viral meme that we inject that then infects the company. Okay. Okay. Bash is asking, why are people still struggling and not reaching the next wealth, et cetera, et cetera? That's a huge societal challenge where we're having to rewrite the social contract today. I'm one of the big believers in UBI, or a universal basic income. I think we'll get there. The challenge of getting to that from a job, taxation, labor, employment structure is so big that we have no confidence in public sector to have the imagination to get us there. But I think that's where we'll end up. But we're essentially awash in abundance, right? The world has more wealth and health and betterness in it than we've ever had before. So we're excited to do that. Andrew's asking, what do you want to do to become a coach? We have a program, a set of training to become a qualified EXO consultant or coach. If you go to our website, openexo.com, you can sign up for it's free to join the community, and then you can get more training as you feel like it. Ali is asking, GDPR, blockchain in Europe. What strategies do you recommend for blockchain in Europe? So I hate to say this, but you should really leave Europe. The regulatory, Switzerland is successful. We're going through a crypto winter right now, where there'll be a reorganization of how we think about blockchain in that world. And then we're going to reapply it. And then you'll get the Gartner hype cycle where nobody will notice, but little by little, blockchain will take over the world. I'm a huge fan of blockchain and crypto in general. I generally advise people put 10% of your net worth into Bitcoin and close your eyes for 10 years if you can. All right, last one from Amy. How do you apply this to small companies of 1 to 3 people? Well, the beauty of being a small company is that you can just take on the model. You don't have an immune system. Immune systems typically start at about 40 to 50 people. And then when you try anything different. So at a small scale, you can essentially just take on these attributes and just start applying them. So if you go read chapter 6 of the EXO book, which is pages 187 to 200, no, I'm just kidding. Chapter 6 talks about how do you start an EXO, and it's a 12-step program, kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous. You pick an MTP, you form a community around that MTP, you pick a founding team, and then you pick the breakthrough idea that delivers minimum 10x better than the current status quo. And then you start applying different lean startup thinking and then the EXO attributes. But we have a very clear prescriptive model. In fact, we have an ability inside our platform to start an EXO called EXO Builder, and you can go check that out. Okay, we're out of time. I can take a quick crack and lose the last question.
The last question.
All right.
So the people are here, they want to be change agents in their company. They want to go from linear to exponential growth. What would you recommend them on mindset, tools, and how to really be able to bring that exponential change in their company?
Yeah, Peter and I are doing a lot of thinking around this right now. He's actually written up a whole thing on how do you create what are the mindsets needed for exponential thinking. You need an abundance mindset. You need need a growth mindset, et cetera, et cetera. I would go look into those and make sure you've got the right mindset for the future, a learning mindset, for example. Anything that you thought about the past is basically irrelevant today. The world is so fundamentally different going forward that all the models that got us successful to get here don't work in the future. So we need a radical reinvention of not just our organizations, but our institutions, and by inference, ourselves, right? Think about how different your life is from your parents' lives, right? The lives that we're living are completely different from our parents. Our kids are living 10x different from us. So we have to kind of recognize that and just guide them and not try and put things onto them in a sense.
So I just found a quick article of Peter talking about mindsets. So I just put it on the chat.
Paste it in, it's great.
Yeah. All right. Salim, really excited. Thank you very much. As always, you open our mind and give us some real tools, examples, data of how the world is growing exponentially, and what do we need to do in our organizations to be able to thrive, but mostly stay alive in the next some years. So thank you very, very much. And guys, you heard it. This is example of what you have to do to really be able to get the mindset, the change, the awaken on your team, and the tools to be able to drive this exponential growth in your company and go from linear growth to exponential growth. Salim, thank you very much. Any last message, any last thought?
No, I think that's it. Somebody said, what do you do if the owner of the company is very conservative? You basically have to change them or leave.
Everything starts with the leadership, change of mindset of leadership.
All right. Talk soon, folks.
Thanks, Salim. Have a great one. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate and see you at the Scaling Up Exponential Organizations Master Business course. Bye.
Bye, guys.